Good morning. I would like to welcome you to Immunic's webcast to present the positive results from our phase 2b CALDOSE-1 maintenance phase data of Vidofludimus calcium in moderate to severe ulcerative colitis patients, as well as updates on our IMU-935 and IMU-856 programs. My name is Jessica Brew, Head of Investor Relations and Communications at Immunic. I will also be the moderator on today's webcast. Speaking on the call are our Chief Executive Officer and President, Dr. Daniel Vitt, and our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andreas Müller. Please note, all participants will be in listen-only mode, and this event is being recorded. After today's presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. If you joined the webcast via the Zoom platform, there are two ways to submit questions. You can either submit your questions in writing via the Q&A tool of the Zoom portal, or if you would like to speak with us directly, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom portal to queue your question. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Such statements can be identified by words such as may, will, expect, anticipate, estimate, or words with a similar meaning. And such statements involve a number of risks and uncertainties that could cause Immunic's actual results to differ materially from those discussed here. Please note that these forward-looking statements reflect Immunic's opinions only as of the date of this presentation, and it undertakes no obligation to revise or publicly release the results of any revision to these forward-looking statements in light of new information or future events. Please refer to Immunic's SEC filings for a more detailed description of the risk factors that may affect Immunic's results and these forward-looking statements. I would now like to turn the webcast over to our CEO and President, Dr. Daniel Vitt, to begin the presentation. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. It is fascinating what positive surprises clinical research can bring, as seen in today's case. This morning, we've published super exciting data on the effect of Vidofludimus calcium, where the activity of Vidofludimus calcium in the maintenance therapy of patients with ulcerative colitis has shown an impressive benefit and even statistical significance despite moderate patient numbers. My colleague, co-founder and chief medical officer, Andreas Müller, will present the data in more detail in a moment. Following that, we will also provide a brief update on what this means for our development pipeline and what other exciting data we expect to see over the coming weeks and months. Andreas, please go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. We are reporting today the results from the maintenance phase of our CALDOSE-1 trial of Vidofludimus calcium in ulcerative colitis patients. After completing the induction phase, patients who achieved symptomatic remission either at week 10 or week 22 were entered into the maintenance phase. In total, 112 patients were randomized in the maintenance phase to receive either 10 or 30 milligrams of Vidofludimus calcium once daily, or patients who received placebo and achieved symptomatic remission continued to receive placebo during the maintenance phase. It needs to be noted that corticosteroids were required to be tapered, if possible, at the start of the maintenance phase. Patients with UC relapse discontinued the maintenance phase. But let's move on now to the main results of the maintenance phase, which was assessed at week 50. This slide summarizes the results for the endpoint of clinical remission, a composite endpoint of reaching both endoscopic healing and symptomatic remission. In UC trials, this endpoint is traditionally the regulatory endpoint for both the induction and maintenance phases. Of the 112 patients that entered the maintenance phase, 70 patients were evaluable for this endpoint at week 50. Vidofludimus calcium showed a dose-linear increase in clinical remission at week 50 as compared to placebo treatment. 61.5% of patients on the 30 milligram dose of Vidofludimus calcium reached clinical remission at week 50 as compared to only 27.8% of patients on placebo treatment. As we can see here, this is a difference of 33.7 percentage points between 30 milligram Vidofludimus calcium and placebo. An exploratory statistical analysis was performed and has shown that the difference in these clinical remission rates of 30 milligrams versus placebo reached statistical significance, despite the fact that the maintenance phase was not prospectively powered for such analysis. There's a more than fourfold likelihood in this statistical analysis that patients on the 30 milligram Vidofludimus calcium dose reach clinical remission at week 50 as compared to placebo. But let's briefly look back at the induction data for clinical remission that we reported in June of last year. During the induction phase, in agreement with almost all prior UC clinical trials, concomitant corticosteroids were allowed with doses up to 20 milligrams per day prednisolone equivalent. The steroid dose was not allowed to be changed in the induction phase and had to be held constant until the end of the induction period. In the induction phase, patients without concomitant steroids receiving any dose of Vidofludimus calcium, this is the left side on the slide, received a benefit versus placebo for clinical remission, symptomatic remission, as well as for endoscopic remission. The differences in this subpopulation between active treatment and placebo were in line with other successful UC trials. However, in patients who were on concomitant steroids during the induction phase, which is the right side of the slide, an interaction between Vidofludimus calcium and corticosteroids occurred that created a more complex overall outcome of the induction phase for the CALDOSE-1 trial. As mentioned before, the CALDOSE-1 protocol required that any attempt was made to withdraw corticosteroids for patients entering the maintenance phase. Immunic believes that today's maintenance phase data confirm Vidofludimus calcium's impressive activity in the absence of chronic corticosteroid co-administration. Hence, the maintenance phase results are in line with the induction data without chronic concomitant use of corticosteroids and underline the performance of Vidofludimus calcium in the steroid-free UC population. Steroids are not a desirable medication in UC patients outside a short use in exceptional circumstances. And any dependence of UC patients for its treatment on steroids is seen as problematic because of the known adverse effects of steroids. On a related note, the previous phase 2A entrance study had already shown that Vidofludimus has a high 88.5% response rate in replacing steroids among steroid-dependent UC patients. Immunic would also like to highlight the strong nature of the Vidofludimus calcium maintenance data regarding clinical remission with an inter-study comparison with maintenance data of other major medications currently used in ulcerative colitis patients. As can be appreciated from this comparison, the difference between active and placebo treatment for Vidofludimus calcium in the maintenance setting seemed to be quite competitive as compared to both the leading biologics and oral medications in this indication. Consistent with the results in clinical remission and the known ability from the previous entrance trial to allow successful withdrawal of steroids during Vidofludimus treatment, steroid-free clinical remission rates also show a consistent and clear benefit for the 30 milligram dose over placebo. Even more important, Immunic performed a subgroup analysis for those patients who received concomitant corticosteroids during the induction phase, in which the interaction pattern was previously found. When entering the maintenance phase, steroids were asked by the protocol to be withdrawn. The results of this subgroup with previous steroid use are obvious. They received the same benefit from the use of Vidofludimus calcium as compared to placebo, as patients who never, or compared to patients who never received corticosteroids in this trial. This clearly highlights the ease with which corticosteroid co-administration can typically be avoided in UC patients and gives a clear direction for potential future trials of Vidofludimus calcium in this patient population. This slide reports the results for endoscopic healing at week 50, defined in this trial as reaching endoscopic Mayo score of 0 or 1. Consistent with other efficacy outcomes from the maintenance phase of the CALDOSE-1 trial, the dose of 30 milligram vidofludimus calcium essentially more than doubles the endoscopic healing rates as compared to placebo. In this trial, 73.1% of UC patients on the 30 milligram vidofludimus dose achieved endoscopic healing at week 50. Very similar to what I've shown you for the endpoint of clinical remission, an exploratory statistical analysis was performed and has shown that the difference in the endoscopic healing rates of 30 milligram versus placebo reached statistical significance, despite the fact that the maintenance phase was not prospectively powered for such analysis. There's an approximately 5-fold likelihood in this statistical analysis that patients on 30 milligram vidofludimus calcium reach endoscopic healing at week 50 as compared to placebo patients. Just quickly to summarize the efficacy results of the maintenance phase for this phase 2 study in UC patients. The data are very consistent between different endpoints and indicate to distinct benefit of vidofludimus calcium as compared to placebo in the maintenance phase. The results confirm our previous observation during the induction phase that vidofludimus calcium provides a benefit regarding clinical remission as compared to placebo in UC patients without concurrent use of corticosteroids. It was important that patients who previously received concomitant corticosteroids in the induction phase responded well in the maintenance phase when corticosteroids were withdrawn, indicating that steroid tapering before induction could have avoided the observed interaction during the induction phase. At week 50, an exploratory analysis demonstrated a statistically significant higher proportion of patients on 30 milligram vidofludimus calcium once daily as compared to placebo, achieving clinical remission and endoscopic healing. So now let's shift to a summary of the safety results. Consistent with prior data sets in other patient population, administration of vidofludimus calcium in the maintenance phase of this trial was observed to be safe and well tolerated. No new safety signals were observed. The incidence of treatment emergent adverse events in both the 10 milligram and the 30 milligram dose groups of vidofludimus calcium was comparable with placebo. The same was true for serious adverse events. There were no increased rates of liver events, liver enzyme elevations, renal event, or adverse events of special interest when compared to placebo. This slide provides more detailed data on liver events, including elevation of important liver enzymes that are used to monitor for potential effects on the liver. In general, liver events and liver enzyme elevations were rare in this trial. As can be observed, there was no signal that administration of vidofludimus calcium was related to an increase in liver events or liver enzyme elevations. By the way, this has been a consistent feature of vidofludimus calcium in other trials and in other patient populations. There's also an emphasis on the assessment of Hy's law cases, which are basically concurrent increases of liver enzymes and total bilirubin over certain limits. It is believed that such Hy's law cases may indicate a potential for drug-induced hepatotoxicity. In this study, no Hy's law cases were observed. In fact, in the entire development program, with more than 1,400 patients or human subjects now exposed to vidofludimus calcium, with treatment lasting up to 4 years, no Hy's law cases have been observed. This slide summarizes the incidence of predefined renal events in the vidofludimus calcium and placebo treatment arms. Renal events were rare in this trial. It seems apparent that there is no increase in renal events during administration of vidofludimus calcium as compared to placebo. In summary, administration of vidofludimus calcium in the maintenance phase was observed to be safe and well tolerated in UC patients. No new safety signal emerged. In particular, there's no increase in liver or renal events as compared to placebo. Overall, the safety and tolerability profile of vidofludimus calcium in UC patients is comparable to placebo and in line with other studies with vidofludimus calcium in other patient populations. In closing, I really would like to thank our investigators, their site staff, the patients involved in this trial, as well as the caregivers, for the opportunity to assess performance of vidofludimus calcium in this trial. I would also like to thank our Immunic team. I know that there are many who are listening into this webcast for the hard work and dedication to get us to such impressive results. I realize that I'm always honored to present here what is essentially your achievement. I'm now handing over back to Daniel to provide a portfolio update on the isomerogant, the IMU-8935, and the IMU-856 development programs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. Yeah, impressive data. I'm still really so happy about what we've seen here, and I would like to share some thoughts what this great data outcome means for Immunic's product pipeline and priorities going forward. As you may recall, in October 22, we published group-level data from a pre-planned interim analysis of one of our development programs, IMU-935, isomerogant, in patients with moderate to severe psoriasis. As reported, the first 2 daily doses of 150 and 300 milligram showed no benefit over placebo in terms of mean PASI score. Before deciding on next steps, however, we wanted to conduct a detailed and thorough analysis of the full data set. We have now done so and have decided to focus our current efforts and resources on the rapidly advancing Vidofludimus calcium and IMU-856 programs over the IMU-935 program. First of all, the positive data from CALDOSE-1 trial of Vidofludimus calcium shown today not only supports our pre-existing strategic focus on gastroenterology and urology, but also somewhat unexpected. Although we haven't decided on any particular path forward in UC, we do want to allocate internal resources to exploring options for this late-stage asset. Meanwhile, for IMU-935, the totality of available data suggests a more complex picture. On the one hand, our current phase 1b data revealed promising dose-dependent signals in gene regulation. On the other hand, we must also consider changes in the expected time to market and increased complexity of potential further development activities for the molecule. We plan to periodically reassess the situation for IMU-935 and also explore potentially developing other molecules in our raw gamma T portfolio in its place. In the meantime, however, and in the light of today's data, we see a big opportunity and high value opportunity in exploring Vidofludimus calcium and potential improved derivatives in the GI space, one of Immunic's pre-existing core areas of expertise. And that brings me directly to IMU-856, our other drug candidate in the GI space. The number code of IMU-856 means good bowel forever. The execution of Part C of the ongoing phase 1 trial and data analysis in patients with celiac disease is going well, and therefore we expect results from this clinical trial earlier than planned already in the current quarter. We have been asked many times about the molecular target, which we have treated as far as a secret. With the publication of clinical results later this quarter, we think that it also makes sense to publish some details on the mechanism of action. This should happen later this year in the context of a scientific GI Congress. We also expect further clinical milestones from our most advanced project, Vidofludimus calcium, IMU-838. We plan to conduct an interim analysis of our phase 2 trial in progressive MS in the second half of the year, evaluating relevant biomarkers in half of the patients. We're now happy to have a Q&A session. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and also Andreas for walking us through the presentation. We will now begin the question and answer session. As a reminder, if you joined the webcast via the Zoom platform, there are 2 ways to submit questions. You can either submit your questions in writing via the Q&A tool of the Zoom portal, or if you would like to speak with us directly, please use the raise hand function of the Zoom portal to queue your question. All right, let's start with Yasmin Rahimi from Piper Sandler. Yas, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, this is Emma on for Yas. Congrats on the data and thanks for taking our questions. We have a few questions regarding the UC program, but first wanted to touch on deprioritizing IMU-935. Specifically, do you have any additional color on what led to that decision? And will we still see the full data? And if so, when would that be?
Yeah, I think I was a little bit expecting that question. I think it's that, as we said, it's a totality of data. There's not a specific thing. It's more looking on what we have so far, what we have seen from the first 2 doses, and also looking to the future. What would be required to continue the trial, dosing up? How far should we go high? Should we extend the dosing and so forth? The conclusion was that just the holistic view on the whole program, it's maybe a better decision to use the resources to progress on the other things we're currently performing. So I think it's a business decision here. This was not a single negative data point, something there. It's more, okay, how likely is it to be successful for an extended trial here or an expanded trial there? And what can we do on the other hand now with this surprising data we got here today? And we, of course, we need to balance things within the company.
All right, thank you. And in terms of CALDOSE-1, or I guess you see in general, what is the current steroid use in these patients? And how would the utility of this drug be if the recommendation is for no concomitant steroids?
I think, Andreas, that is more a question for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question, and we have also raised this with our medical advisory board here for gastroenterology and specifically for IBD. Their very quick consensus was that this would really not impact on the marketability of Vidofludimus calcium in IBD or in ulcerative colitis, as it is the steroid use is really undesirable, and it's kind of an artificial setting in these clinical trials that you allow these steroids to be really carried through the whole induction period. So it was implemented always in these trials because you don't want to artificially give one treatment arm an unfair bias, basically, when you evaluate the data. In clinical practice, I think you want to use corticosteroids as quickly and as short as possible. And I think that that really, I think, changes the picture from a artificial setting in an induction trial. And on the other hand, I think we had already shown this phase 2A trial, the entrance trial that I mentioned, which was published quite some time ago, that actually Vidofludimus use can replace in almost all of the patients corticosteroids, and that really, I think, makes it possible to think of even a routine use of Vidofludimus calcium without any corticosteroids as a co-medication.
Thank you. And I guess on that note, how were the patients tapered from induction? Specifically, like, what do you mean by the definition of tapered, if possible? And lastly, do you have any additional details on bio-experience versus naive patients in the maintenance phase?
So yes, so in terms of tapering, corticosteroids are usually tapered with some steps. So it's usually you begin with 5 milligram steps, and then at the end it's probably 2 milligram steps. So it will be usually tapered over maybe 2 or 3 weeks, depending on the dose that you're on. And there was no fixed tapering scheme in this trial, but that's usually how corticosteroids have to be, even clinical routine, been tapered. So now I'm in the situation again that in all of the excitement, I forgot the second question, sorry.
Bio-experienced versus naive.
Oh yeah, okay. So in this trial, we had relatively few biologically experienced patients. I think it was around 10%. And so I think a subgroup analysis probably doesn't make too much sense because it has too few patients. But in general, I think we had, I think, shown this in the induction data where we had more patients in there. There was really no markedly different behavior of Vidofludimus calcium in the biologically experienced group. Usually, it's considered kind of a more resistant group to treatment, but I think there was really no conclusion that we can make given the relatively low number of biologically experienced patients in this trial.
Thanks very much, and congrats again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
Our next guest is Andreas Zagoridis from Wedbush Pecra. Andreas, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Good morning. This is Caroline on for Andreas. Thank you for taking our questions. Just a few from us. So just curious if you could outline some of the options you're exploring for the Immunic 838 program in UC. Are you thinking about investigating Immu-838's use in other GI indications? And just curious if you've been having active partnership discussions, and do you anticipate a partner would like to see more data from the program given the results from the induction phase?
Yeah, I think that's of course one of the core questions: how to make use of that great data. As you today, what we have seen is a proof, really a proof that the drug works in this very important indication. Specifically on the tough maintenance part. And so what to do? And I think we see a couple of different ways here. We think it's too early to really say, okay, this is our final way forward here. I think we are, as I said, we are on the one hand looking on Vidofludimus calcium itself. We may think, for example, looking on a different formulation may be interest, but also looking on close related derivatives, maybe with, for example, maybe a little bit longer half-life could be an interesting option as well. But these are options we're thinking through. As soon as we have decided what is the smartest way forward to continue here, we will definitely update the market on that. Of course, we were using the time in the last 2 years also to develop our whole portfolio. So we are starting from an educated part already here. If it comes to our partnering discussions, of course, that is a nice thing because we, as you know, we also have a second molecule in GI space, and we think with the expected data readout later this quarter, we think we have something which is very nicely falling into the same area, and also we have the same potential partners which could be interested in both, and there may be also a substantial synergy there. So that's of course something we would definitely consider. That's an important unmet need, and therefore I think it's an area of really high interest.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just one follow-up from us. Can you remind us of the data we can expect to see from the Part C readout coming up in this quarter and just your expectations? Yeah,
I think that this is Part C in celiac disease patients, and this part as part of a phase 1 trial is really designed to demonstrate that the drug works. So it's a proof of concept design, and we are testing the molecule in celiac disease patients in a 4-week trial. We included here a gluten challenge to also see if the drug can prevent, for example, disease activity here after the gluten challenge. So that's by itself an interesting trial, and we had and also you can find that on the homepage quite in-depth description of what we're doing. And we had an R&D day recently where we had some experts talking about the disease itself and the unmet medical need in celiac disease. So we're looking forward to an exciting readout. Of course, this is it's double-blind placebo controlled, so we don't know what's coming out of there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and congrats on the data.
Thank you, Caroline. All right, let's proceed with Matt Kaplan from Ladenburg. Matt, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, good morning, guys. Thanks for taking the questions.
Morning.
I guess help us understand one of the components of how you just presented the data with respect to the denominator that you used and the N for the different analysis and sets that you presented in the maintenance phase. For example, I guess with the full data set, there are 27, 45, and 40 patients respectively in the placebo, 10 milligrams and 30 milligrams doses. Yet when your presentation used different denominators. Can you help us explain, give us some more details around how that analysis was done?
Hi, Matt, this is Andreas. So yes, for example, if you look at our slide 5, which is the clinical remission. Yes, so we have the full analysis set, which you mentioned. the 27 patients who are basically who received placebo, then 45 patients who received 10 milligrams, and 40 patients who received 30 milligrams. And then in the table below, I think we have the evaluable patients and the total patients. And what it means is patients with a UC relapse in maintenance, of course, dropped out, and they didn't have, for example, the endoscopy at week 50 that is required to assess Vidofludimus calcium clinical remission or clinical remission rates at that point. On top of it, some of the patients basically for one or another reason had no data available for this endpoint. But as you can see, also there was a disproportionate number of patients who discontinued in the placebo and 10 milligram groups, and that's basically comes up with the numbers. That's why we try to be as transparent as possible with the tables that we present, that we have always like the evaluable and the total group that actually reached that readout at week 50.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And then I guess in terms of the interaction between 838 and steroids and the impact in the induction phase, can you more fully describe what that interaction is and what the impact is on 838 with concomitant use of steroids?
So I think that's something that we're still trying to explore further, and at this point we actually know a lot what it doesn't is. So it's not a PK interaction, it's not a certain drug interactions in a sense with other drugs. It doesn't involve a certain subset or characteristic of the patient. So that we have checked. So it leaves us with our thinking that is maybe something on the immunological level, where you have this interference or interaction between use of corticosteroids and Vidofludimus calcium. We have also checked with other trials where we didn't have a long-term use. So we had short-term use of corticosteroids. For example, in COVID patients, of course, you use steroids, and also in MS patients during relapse, you use corticosteroids. And there we see absolutely no interaction between Vidofludimus calcium and steroid use. So it seemed to be something that happens with long-term concomitant use. We're still running a few analyses, to be quite honest, to understand this a little bit further and maybe drill down to maybe the more immunological level and what's happening in these patients who have the interaction. But at the moment, I don't think we can really point to something that we think is responsible. We only know what it doesn't is. So unfortunately, that's a little bit probably frustrating for you as an answer, but that's where the level where we are.
No, that detail is definitely helpful. And
anything else, Matt?
Data is very clean. Any more detail you want to add to that?
Oh, sorry, Matt, we lost you for a couple of seconds. Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, hang on one second. Hello.
Yes,
Hi.
we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. The question was more on the safety side. It looks like the safety profile of 838 continues to be very clean. Any more detail you want to add on the safety data that you have out 50 weeks?
I think there's we like usually safety data that are boring, so that's why. So that's a good news, I guess. There's really, I mean, we presented all of the treatment emergent adverse event rates, the serious adverse events, renal, liver, special interest rates, and they're all, I think, in line with other patient populations. And they also point that there's no difference in the safety profile between Vidofludimus calcium and placebo. And in that respect, I think there's nothing else to report, to be quite honest.
Okay, great. Well, congrats on the results. Thanks for taking the questions.
No, thank you, Matt, for your interest.
Thank you, Matt. The next guest today is Thomas Smith from SVB Securities. Tom, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hey guys, good morning. Thanks for taking the questions. Just to follow up on the previous question, I guess I'm just wondering if you had presented these analyses on an ITT basis, what would that have done to the treatment effect? And would the difference between the 30 mg arm and the placebo arm still have statistical significance?
So I can't answer the last question, but I think what I can say is that we saw a disproportionate discontinuation rate in the placebo and 10 milligram dose group. So in a ITT analysis, it would these discontinuations would be recorded as treatment failures, and I think given that it's happening more in the placebo, percentage-wise more in the placebo and the 10 milligram arms, actually it would probably actually made the difference between 30 milligram and placebo a little bit wider. However, this was an exploratory maintenance phase. I have to say this when we planned the trial, yes, because we wanted to use the maintenance phase for planning of the phase 3 trial, because sometimes you need to understand how you have to power your maintenance part in phase 3, because in phase 3 you have to do a formal statistical analysis as well. So here we didn't plan for that for a formal analysis. We did an exploratory statistical analysis. We also didn't control the number of patients that went into maintenance. In a phase 3 trial, you would do this. You would, for example, phase 3 trials often had like feeder arms that actually go straight into maintenance so that you can control how many patients you get into maintenance phase. We didn't do this here. We really relied only on the patients from the induction that reached symptomatic remission. So I think in that respect, I think it was a little bit done differently than you would do it in a phase 3 trial, where you would have to do the ITT analysis. But we haven't done the ITT analysis here because it was an exploratory analysis, but I wouldn't expect it to be different. But I have no proof of that.
But maybe to add on that, I think, and Tom, I think I like your question because I asked Andreas the same question. It is definitely more on the conservative side what we presented today. So I think if you would do the full ITT, I think the expected outcome would be better, even a higher difference between the placebo and the high dose. So that's good to know. And for me, it was sufficient to continue on that basis.
Okay, got it. And then just maybe another follow-up on a previous question. Are there plans to present the 935 detailed data? And if so, when can we expect to see the detailed results?
Well, we're still discussing what to do with that, because I think also that we deprioritized. We didn't say we never do that again. We also want to learn for potential new molecules in the future. But of course, this decision was also a little bit influenced by what's else going on in that space, in the psoriasis space. And it needs a proper analysis also internally on or digestion of what we know so far. For example, there was no safety issue found in the clinical data so far. So there's nothing which would worry us and block us in principle to continue here for development. It was really a business decision to deprioritize.
Understood. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you taking the questions.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
I received one question in writing, which I'm happy to read. Tysabri is approved for MS, UC, and Crohn's. Does the data presented today increase your confidence in the use of IMU-838 in Crohn's disease? Curious, since this could help determine how this program could be valued by a potential large pharma partner. Lastly, does any part of the data get you more excited about the MS data?
So I think this, I think that's a question to me. For me, I would assume. Yes, I think there are several drugs or several classes of drugs that have worked in MS and also in other diseases like IBD. And I would, in general, I would assume that if you show good efficacy in ulcerative colitis, this was really, I think, increase the likelihood that it also works in Crohn's disease. But it needs to be proven. I think usually drugs that work in UC work in Crohn's disease, of course, and that's, I think, also the basis of this question. But there's also graduation sometimes. Yeah, so you have some drugs work better in Crohn's or better in ulcerative colitis. I think definitely, I think it would increase our likelihood of success in the Crohn's disease area. How does this reflect on the MS data? To be quite honest, our MS data so far has been exceptionally good. So I don't think I need a lot of help from the UC trial to really be convinced that MS is a wonderful indication for Vidofludimus calcium. And I think we have just at the end of last year looked at the confirmed disability worsenings, for example, from our phase 2 trial now with longer term data and really shown that they are wonderful. They compare very favorable to other drugs in MS, and we believe that the combined anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and neuroprotective properties of Vidofludimus calcium provide a wonderful, I think, basis for the activity of Vidofludimus calcium in MS. So I don't think we need any help from UC for the MS space, to be quite honest.
Thank you, Andreas. The next one live today is Mayank Mamtani from B. Riley. Mayank, please unmute yourself.
Hi, this is William Woodham from Mayank Mamtani. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hi, William.
Awesome, thank you. Really great to hear the positive results today, and a lot of the questions that I had have actually already been addressed. I do have one, a couple quick little minor follow-ups, specifically about the determinations that occurred during this trial. I was just curious. I believe you had said that if they relapse and need to go back on the corticosteroids. I was just curious if they relapse and need to go back on the corticosteroids, when this occurred, and if that was a large percentage, or was it more just patients who terminated early? Just a little clarification on that would be great. And then one.
Yeah, I can answer that. So the patients who had a UC relapse during maintenance phase, they've actually dropped out of the maintenance phase. So they had to basically drop out, and they could either go into open label extension, or they can go on treatment outside this trial. So it was not that you were back on corticosteroids when you had a UC relapse. The way that you're tapered sometimes is at the beginning of the maintenance phase, has nothing to do with UC relapse, is that you bring it down the doses of corticosteroids over a few weeks, for example, over 2 or 3 weeks. And if symptoms reappear, you basically go back up, or you just do not taper further. And that has happened. I think there were 1 or 2 patients actually that where this happened. But in general, the patients who went into maintenance, they were able to taper the corticosteroids completely. So there were, I think, 1 or 2 patients at the end that continued with corticosteroids, but it was no real number. What we had seen in this trial, that the time to UC relapse actually was longer for patients on Vidofludimus calcium as compared to placebo. So it speaks to what I said before, that we had more patients on UC relapse, or more patients discontinued in the placebo and 10 milligram groups as compared to the 30 milligrams group.
Got it. Appreciate that extra color there. And then one more, for the UC, maybe if you could just put in context the UC maintenance data from your peers. We're pleased to see that this gets better from the induction to the maintenance. And then how do you see that overall profile should be viewed by strategic who may be looking to evaluate the value of the program?
Yeah, so I think this is first of all, I think you're asking again probably what the I'm sorry, I need to sneeze. Sorry. That's why we looked at the subgroup of patients who had corticosteroids in induction and then were tapered off in maintenance, and see what happens to them. And basically, there's a complete reversal in terms of the activity of vidofludimus calcium, whereas in induction, when you have corticosteroids ongoing and a co-administration of corticosteroids, you see this interference, and you basically, actually, patients with corticosteroids and placebo do better than corticosteroids and vidofludimus calcium, which is, I think, more or less the definition of an interaction. These patients actually, when they tapered off their corticosteroids in maintenance phase, did extremely well. So that they basically revert back to the activity of vidofludimus calcium that we had seen without corticosteroids in the induction phase. And I think that's good news, because it really shows how easily you can convert these patients back to vidofludimus activity once you taper these steroids. And in terms of, I think there was a second part in terms of what does it mean to strategic partnerships, for example, that this drug, it seems to not be being able to be used with corticosteroids. And I think, especially in the IBD phase, IBD space, and in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, there's a lot of discussions and also of activity also by the bigger pharma companies that are in that space to do combination treatments. And that's really, everybody talks now about combination treatments. The issue with combination treatments is that you often can't combine drugs that have a certain safety profile, because it's synergistic in the adverse events then as well. And we believe that also this drug, with its safety profile, doesn't influence hematology parameters in none of the trials that we have done. It doesn't increase infections in most of the trials, or in all of the trials that we have done. It doesn't have liver enzyme elevations as compared to an increase in liver enzyme. All of this, I think, would be very attractive to companies who are looking, and almost all of the big companies now in the gastro space are looking for combination treatment, to really use vidofludimus not only in the monotherapy setting, but also combine it with their existing drugs. So I think there are probably some good combination that you can think of. Some biologics, for example, really lend itself to combination with vidofludimus calcium. So I would think of ustekinumab, for example, or vedolizumab. And I think I see where this activity that we have shown today, I think is so helpful when it's combined with the safety profile of vidofludimus calcium. I hope that gives you a little bit of flavor of our thinking.
It does. I appreciate that. And again, great to see the positive data, and thanks for taking our questions.
Oh, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And we have one more in the queue, which is Dane Leone from Raymond James. I hope I said this correctly. Dane, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking the questions, and thanks for the update. I don't know if this is a dumb question, but I just wanted to ask if you had maybe could elaborate a little bit on a couple overlapping concepts of how you progress this program forward. It seems on one hand that you could be served by doing another study that's more stringently head-to-head versus corticosteroid use in an induction phase. But then you want to elucidate potentially maybe a combination study in the maintenance phase. Would you consider doing a bridging study in one of those two pathways to maybe make the data package more robust, and maybe progress or help support discussions with potential partners for a broader phase 3 program? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I start with a more strategic question here. I think we need to explore and to discuss with those partners first to find out what is the best way forward for that. And as Andrea said, there are so many different options. It's something where we really want to have a little bit of time to discuss it. I think today we met the major milestone in any program development, meaning you show it works. And that together, and then that is something important here, with the extremely benign safety profile, easy to use oral drug, it opens up so many different ways that we need to really not only think through, but also work through and discuss with potential partners there. internally, I think, and I elaborated that earlier on that we see different ways forward, and we would definitely look on all of those options, broadening the asset, also looking for an improved version here, also to make sure this is specifically dedicated to the eye space and may have some improved properties here. So there's more we would maybe do in parallel to these discussions and thoughts on going forward. As Andreas said, strategically, I think the opportunity of having combination studies, that is something important here, just on the long run, on the whole holistic view on how the IBD market is developing right now.
I'm sorry, I think, Dane, I probably confused others more with my comment about combination treatment. I think this speaks more towards the interest by strategic players in the GI space and what they're looking for and what they think as really the next wave of treatments in IBD and in ulcerative colitis. And I think it strategically, I think Vidofludimus calcium is very well positioned for combination treatment. But I think the next steps definitely are not combination treatment, to my mind. It's something where you would go into a phase 2b or phase 3 study for monotherapy and really establish the drug's activity in monotherapy first before you go into combination treatments. And I think the opportunity with these data now confirming basically the induction data without concomitant corticosteroid use, I think is there that you can either do another induction phase 2 trial and basically just reestablish this without, but you could also think of it, and that we had some discussions with our medical advisory board, that you could potentially even go into phase 3 with this drug if you wanted to. And just basically tapering off corticosteroids before you start the induction study or at the start of the induction study. So similar to what was done here at the maintenance study. So I think this should work. Whether you do this with Vidofludimus calcium or with maybe a molecule that's more optimized maybe in certain aspects and allows you a longer protection period, maybe even than for a Vidofludimus calcium we already have, and separate it. That depends a little bit on also our discussions that we will have with potential strategic partners and some more internal discussions where we evaluate the options going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dane. All right, this concludes our question and answer session. I would like to turn the webcast back over to Daniel for any closing remarks.
Yeah, and I just want to thank everybody for listening to the call, for this open and quite active discussions. I enjoy very much. And we are open also for individual follow-up requests as always. Jessica is happy to receive your requests for that, and we'll be happy to jump on a one-on-one discussion wherever needed. Thank you. And also finally, I don't want to ignore that what Andreas said. I would also like to thank all the people involved in this trial, the team, patients, treating physicians, investigators, our advisory board, and everybody, really making that a big success. It's a big day for the company. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everybody for joining Immunic's webcast today. The call has now concluded. You may now disconnect.